So I've measured the inside of the cabinet so I can look for the length and the width of the shelf. To save a little bit of time, I buy these edge glued 1x16 by 3, and first I'll just check to make sure that they are square, which in this case they certainly are not. So I will just find the square, mark that on the end, and then my overall length is going to be 33 1/16 is the inside dimension. So I want to take about a 1/4 inch off of that. These are the little brackets I'll put into the holes here, and there's about a 1/16 here, and then there's just a tiny little piece on here from where they put the nub through there. I like these for the bottom because they'll still allow this to expand and contract. So you have to leave a good, probably a 1/4 inch on the width, like a cross grain, for it to expand. The end really won't expand much, but I'll still leave about a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch on the ends here for it to expand and contract, and just to move in there in case the whole piece moves a little bit. So if I take my overall length and reduce that by a 1/4 inch, that gives me 1/8 of an inch for these pieces on the supports on both sides, and then an extra 1/8 of an inch or a 1/16 of an inch on each side on the ends to let it kind of move around and let you fit it in there. Like I said though, I'll leave a 1/4 of an inch on each side, or maybe about 3/16 of an inch on each side to flex for that. So if I take a 1/2 an inch off my overall width, that will give me about 1/8 of an inch for each of these, and then 3/16 on each side for it to expand and contract. And I think that should be enough. There's quite a bit of a space on here for this shelf to still grab hold of when you set it in there. So I will set this up, get my dimensions for these. The long length, which I won't need all 16 inches of this edge glued piece, I'll rip this down. What I'll do is I'll rip it on my bandsaw, and then I'll just take the hand plane and make it nice and smooth. For the end here, I'm going to cut this with my jigsaw and a guide, and that'll leave a really smooth finish that I don't even have to sand or do anything to. Alright, so I'm going to rip the extra width off of this board, and I measured up from the side because I'm using the same guide side that I used to make my end square. So I'm going to put this through. Now these boards, these glue ups, they're not straight, or they're not 90 degrees on the edge. They're not even 16 wide on one end and 16 wide on the other. So I'm not going to put up a guide fence or anything. I'm just going to rip this and follow my line, but I'll leave a little bit of my line on there to plane down to. Alright, so we'll take this over to the workbench and plane it smooth on that side. That's all it takes. I will slightly round over these edges just a little bit with the black paint plane. Just a little chamfer to ease them, so when we put them in and out of the shelf or we move them around, they feel a little bit better to the touch. Just a couple of passes. Okay, so let's change our setup and we'll cut this cross grain end cut. I have set up the board here to make the cross grain end cut, and I have it held down to my bench with the holdfasts and a little piece of cedar that's softer than the pine so that it doesn't mar up my shelf. So I've drawn a line on here where I want to make my cut, made sure that that was square with the board. And then I have this nice kind of a guide here that clamps down onto the piece and allows you to use it as a guide with a jigsaw. So I'm just going to put my jigsaw up here and run it across. Let the don't push too hard because the blade can go back and forth pretty easy. If you get a cut in the end here, it's not the end of the world. That is a little bit angled because it's a shelf and it's going to be up against the side, but do the best you can. This is also a nice cut you could make with your pull saw, which would make a really nice straight cut here. Maybe I'll show one of those after I do this with the saber saw. What I like about this is that it leaves a really nice clean finish. For me in my shop, this is one of the hardest cuts to make accurately with hand tools, or with a hand power tool as well. I have a table saw and everything, but I don't like to set it up for these kind of cuts because it creates so much dust, and I just like to work a lot with my hands and hand tools. So the hand saw works well, but getting a long cross cut like this that is smooth, because I could do this on the bandsaw, but it wouldn't be as smooth as I would want it to be. Alright, so I always like to start the blade spinning, or I should say reciprocating, before you hit the wood. There, that worked pretty well. That is really, really straight. So like I said, sometimes when I'm working with this, you can put too much pressure one way or another or against the fence and the blade will bend and your cut will be at an angle. I have found, and I'm not sure if it's just me, the way I use it, or if it's my jigsaw, but if I put the guide, when I'm looking at it this way where I'm going to cut, if I put the guide on the left, it tends to be much straighter than when I put it on the right. And that just might be the way I work, but when I put it on the right, it tends to bend and I must just push one way or the other. So play around with it. Alright, so the other end we'll set up and I'll cut that by hand. Alright, here's the setup to cut this. Pretty much the same thing. Just put the hold fast down. I like to use this saw even though it has a back brace on it. So it's kind of like a back saw. You can't cut all the way down like this, but I think it helps to kind of keep a straight line. If I saw at, instead of like a traditional 45-degree angle, maybe come up to about a 20 or so. This saw has such fine teeth that this does the same as the saber saw or the jigsaw. It puts a really fine edge that you don't need to sand. If you find you get off track just a little bit, you can just slightly twist this and it'll get back on track. Alright, that leaves that edge nice and smooth. So then the last thing I'll do on the end pieces is just put a little bit of a chamfer on there. Make sure on the end grain you angle this down quite a bit. I probably do about a 45-degree angle. Push it along there so it gives you a decent edge. Just soften these just a little bit. Alright, we'll do the back side and then we'll have to drill holes for the shelf to fit in the bottom. We'll do that next. From the bottom of the frame or the carcass, I've measured up a 1/2 inch all the way around, and then I set my 1/4 inch Forstner bit to the same depth as the peg for the support, just a little bit deeper actually. So now I'll go around and I will drill these holes, making sure they are right at the same level. Hit a hard spot in the wood there. So then these will sit just like that. And you can put them like this and the board will hide them because these are only about a 1/2 inch, 5/8 tall. Or you can also spin them around and put them like this and then put your screw up through there. Either way works depending on the height you want. I'd like to leave as much room in here as possible to set stuff in, so I want the shelf to be as low as possible. So this will leave about an 1/8 of an inch. Put the shelf up about an 1/8 of an inch from the bottom of the carcass. So we'll go and we'll drill all of these out and then we'll test fit the shelf. Then we'll double check that the other side is the same, and we'll cut all the shelves. Here's our progress on the top, or on the cabinet itself. All of the 6 shelves are in. Put one down below here, and then these are adjustable. The top 4 shelves are adjustable. So I think what I'm planning to do is I'm going to paint the whole outside white and distress it, and kind of like I did my other video for the painted Morris chair. If you ever look at that, it'll have that distressed white paint with some of the wood sanded off. So put a couple coats of white paint on it, but I think I'm planning on the inside to leave it natural wood, and I'll just put a couple of coats of 100% tung oil on there. That's a real low VOC, no VOC, low odor that I can use inside in the winter months. So I think that works pretty well. Plus I think I like the idea of the doors opening up, and the doors and the cabinet is all white, and then the inside is just a nice kind of glowing pine. Alright, so I like the way that's looking so far. I have this set up on my workbench, and I'm just going to round over these edges here. And I'll do maybe about a half or a third at a time. Just take it down to about 1/8 of an inch on a 45, and then round that over by rotating your plane. Doesn't take too much. Make sure you have a nice sharp plane iron. It'll go pretty smoothly. I made 6 triangles here that will go in the corners to screw up through and attach the top. So I'm going to cut these out on my bandsaw and then true them up on the, or square them up on the disc sander. The top corner blocks that I'll glue in, I have 6 of them. What I'm going to do is screw up through these with a screw. This is a number 6 screw, and then I have a washer on it. And I've made the hole a 1/4 inch. So it's going to allow, when I screw this up into the tabletop, it will allow this to move back and forth just a little bit, about 1/8 of an inch on each side. That'll be a 1/4 of an inch, and I think that should be plenty for this 16-inch top to expand and contract with the humidity changes of the seasons. So in the summertime it's going to be a little bit wider, in the wintertime a little bit narrower. So I think this will work well. I've used this in the past, and it allows you to fasten things down really tight so the top doesn't move, but it still allows just a little bit of that movement inside of that larger hole. So next I will glue these in to the top corners, and then 2 in the middle, and then we'll put the top on. To attach these corner blocks, I'll just put a little bit of glue here. Push them into the corner, and I'm going to drop them down about 1/8 of an inch, just so that the top is able to ride perfectly on the top. The top board is allowed to ride perfectly on the top of the carcass here. And once I have that in there, all I'll do is put a clamp in the corner here. I like these DeWalt little clamps because they have a groove cut in them, so you can catch a corner like this. And not too much pressure, and then we'll just let those dry. I won't put any kind of fastener on these because I think these hold just fine in the corner. So you'll also test, these are at a 90-degree angle, you'll also test your carcass building ability or the cabinet building to make sure it's true. If yours aren't perfect, a couple of mine were off, or these were off a little bit, I just took them back on the disc sander and sanded them a little bit. So, alright, I'll go around and do the rest of these, and then we'll attach the top after these are dry. If you let your plane blade get too dull, you'll have some tear out like this. And on this project I started to notice some of this happening. So I decided that I'd have to take my blade out, and I spent about 10-15 minutes sharpening it. And I took it all the way through the progressions of paper. So now I have almost a mirror-like finish on there, but I went from 400 grit all the way up to 3000 grit, and you'll see the difference here. This is what it looked like before when the blade was a little bit dull. You have a little bit of tear out in there, and then I'll run this across. And there you see the difference, how it's extremely smooth, no tear out, no breakout. So just a reminder, take a little bit of extra time and keep everything sharp. Makes a difference. I have the top sitting on top of this, and I set my compound, my combination square here to about 1 1/16. So I'll make sure that that's spaced 1 1/16 there and 1 1/16 there. So I have a little bit of an overhang equal on both sides, or all three front sides. And then the back I have about a 1/2 inch overhang. So I'll get this set up, clamp this down, and then we'll secure the top. First I'm going to drill a hole up in here and through this hole and into the top. I've set my drill bit so that it's just a little bit less than this screw. I'll go right up through the middle. Be careful not to drill up through the top. And then I will put the screw in here with the washer. Not too tight, but tight enough to hold it down. And that'll hold it. I don't really have a clutch set, just looking at that it's nice and snug. You get 6 of them in there, and that top won't move. So I'll do the rest of these, and that will fasten the top on. I'm going to start by putting the molding on the bottom here. Start in the corner and cut this piece so it'll work. The length is accurate, and I cut this piece but just on one side, so make sure that that lines up perfectly. And then see, this piece is going to have to be bent in a little bit, so I'll start up here in the front, but we want to make sure this is nice and tight. And then we'll just fire a nail in here. Make sure that we go down. And that should hold it. And then just keep everything lined up. We'll put a few more nails in here. And that should be good. I'll put one more right up front here. You don't want to get too close though to the front because you can crack that and it'll break out. And then we'll have to put a little bit of putty in here to fill these nail heads. But now that we have this one set, we'll clamp this end and go and look at the other ends to make sure they line up, and keep going around until we do the 3 pieces on the bottom, and then we'll do 3 pieces right on the underneath the top.